Ground drivers because it takes a lot of sweat to use that book.
So
All right,
can
Ira,
you put in a
Ira,
route? Can you put in a route and have that pop up on your phone if you have the app?
Well, the app is not so interactive. You can put in the route and it'll go to the page. The app is basically, yeah. Harold's cutting me off. So
you
the
know,
app is definitely it's a picture of every page. So it'll take you to that page, but if you don't put the route in correctly, you won't get that, which is what Cantoneme is indicating. Sometimes it's very hard to figure out the route, so you
if
can guess.
if Canternimi sends me a link, I will put it on the Facebook page. And we have a musical play-in with some very interesting commentary by our own Ira Rosenblum. Ira.
Okay, good morning all. Today we're going to be hearing one little bit of a work by Steve Reich called Tehillim, strangely enough. Steve Reich, and he does pronounce it that way, was born in 1936. He's a New Yorker, very much alive and active. He was one of like 3 or 4 very prominent composers in the 1960s, the downtown New York music scene, who developed what we commonly call minimalism in music. And for those who aren't familiar with that term, very briefly, minimalist music is music that will take one sort of very small fragment of a melody and repeat it over and over with minor variations, and also rhythmic variations. There's a certain drone element to it. And when you listen to it, it can be very, very hypnotic. I'm going to jump right to Tehillim and not talk about his other works, although there are many works worth hearing. But Tehillim he wrote in 1981, and it represented a kind of shift in his career in that he started to really explore his Judaism. He developed an interest in his Jewish background. And so Tehillim was his first work that actually did this exploration.
Someone is not muted.
Somebody needs to mute themselves, please. Tehillim is in 4 parts, settings of Psalms 19, 34, and the third part, which we'll be hearing today, is the psalm we're studying, Psalm 18, 2 verses from it. And then the last part is Psalm 150. And Harold, if you could put up the text.
I put it into chat. I put it into chat. It's
Okay.
right there.
I thought we could look at the Safari, but no matter. This is a setting of lines 26 and 27 from Psalm 18. And one of the things that also was a departure in this work for him was that he let the text itself and the rhythm of the text dictate the rhythm, rather than vice versa. And that was sort of atypical for him at that point. So we'll listen to a couple of minutes of it. It's too long to play the whole thing now, but maybe if we have time for the play out, those who want to stay, we can hear the whole thing. So I think that gives you a sense of this music, which I find very beautiful and hypnotic.
I do too. Thank you so much for that. I do too. Really beautiful. Uh, all right. Well, let's see if I get through with technology today. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to Yael and to Harold for jumping in and teaching yesterday. Sounds like you had a great time without me. Maybe I'll do it more often. Sounds great. And learning happens in all different settings with all different teachers. So thank you, everybody. Okay, the reality of our being online. As I said to those earlier, it turned out that Spectrum was doing work in my neighborhood. And, they don't think to tell you they're going to be doing that, of course. And so when I called, I got that outage in the neighborhood thing. So here I am. But I did learn a new technology yesterday, which I didn't know in time to get back onto the Psalms class, which is to make my phone into a hotspot or something. Is that what the right word
That's
for
it. That's
for
it.
the computer? So I was able to do meetings later in the afternoon once I had discovered that workaround. So I learned something new from it, and you all learned from each other yesterday so beautifully. All right, so back to Psalm 18. I think we got through the first psalm, right? The first verse.
Yeah.
And we described who Shaul was, Saul. Shaul is Saul, and his name is very similar to the word Shaol, which we'll come across later in this psalm also, but I'll hold off on that. Let's look at verse 2. Vayomer. And notice, if you are a Hebrew reader, there's a vav in the beginning of Vayomer, and in the English, there's no vav. Means very simply and or other conjunctives, except in biblical Hebrew, which I've spoken about before. The vav in certain verbs and in beginning of words or phrases has a magical power. So Yomer, who is a Hebrew speaker here? How would you translate the word Yomer if you just saw it without the vav, the first word of the second sentence?
Oh,
What?
Will,
oh,
it will.
Ben, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
spoke.
No,
In past or future?
No,
Yes.
will speak.
What?
Will speak. He
Will speak.
Speak.
What?
Will speak. It's in
Right.
the
Actually,
future.
it's in the future, or I would call it imperfect. More
I'm
properly.
in shock. How are you?
Rabbi, it's not Vayomer, it's Vayomar.
Right, by Vayoma, that vowel under the mem there is not the important marker. Because it's changed because of the yud with the dagesh in it.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Do you know what I mean? It changes but that's because of the shortening and lengthening of the vowel. So remember, some of you remember way back when I talked that in biblical tenses, they're not called past, present, and future. In biblical grammar, it's perfect and imperfect, which I believe is true for Slavic languages, true, but I'm not sure. And it's true, I think it's true for Russian. I don't know if Darina's here to tell us if it's true for Bulgarian. It means a perfect aspect of a verb means the action is completed, which we usually call past tense. But that's not an exact analogy, but we often use the word past tense. It means the action is completed. And imperfect, I am perfect, means the action is not completed, which could be either present or future, right? If something is not yet completed. So what this does is that the vav is called the vav haipuch in Hebrew, or I forgot what it's called in
Conversive.
the conversive, the converting vav, the conversive vav that converts one tense to the other in the English. So what it does is that it takes something usually in biblical Hebrew that's in the future or imperfect and puts it into the perfect. This is one of the famous features of biblical grammar. And it's often translated wrong by translating the vav with and, A-N-D, and he said, but it does mean he said, meaning it's telling a story that's been completed or past. But for those of you who are Hebrew readers or learning about Hebrew, it's very good because of the, up there, Cantoneme is correcting me about the vowel change. Yeah, all right, so it's because the accent mark, not because of the, but that vowel changes a lot based on whether it's a long or short, etc. Cantoneme is better than I am at the reasons why, but it doesn't indicate a difference between perfect and imperfect. Thank you, Cantoneme, for that correction. So that's why we don't translate Vayomar or Vayomer or Vayomar as and he says or and he said. The Vav there is functioning differently. And one of the ways we know that it's not a regular Vav, that's just a conjunctive purpose, is the Dagesh, the dot that's in that Yud. So everybody see a dot in the Yud in Yomar? So a Vav Haipuch has two features. One, the Vav exists. It can have different vowels underneath the Vav. It doesn't always have to have the vowel that's there, but it often does. But it also has a Dagesh in the following letter. So this is a level of detail that for some of you is way uninteresting and over your head. And for some of you, I hope you'll watch out for this. Okay? So, the next word, notice how Levy translate this. I have loved you from the womb. Now, I have loved you, which we in English go through all different forms. Hebrew is much more limited, but we have all the different, I have loved you. So, where does he get this from? There's one word here, right? One word. So, the aleph in the beginning shows its first person, imperfect aspect. The shoresh, the root, is resh, chet, mem, and the suffix is you. So we've got the I and the you part. Where do we have loved from the womb in Levy's translation, right? Where is it loved from the womb? So rechem in Hebrew means womb. Rachamim, compassion or caring or mercy, is from the same Hebrew word as womb. So Levy is doing something very interesting here. We won't see this in all different translations and interpretations. Some people just go for the meaning of love or care or have mercy for or compassion about. But he is using the word itself to say, I have had these feelings from the womb, meaning forever. It's a very interesting translation, and you won't see it everywhere at all. And but it has this. So rechem, by the way, so we use the word rachamim, rechem, rachamim, rachmanas in Yiddish or Ashkenazi Hebrew. It might be familiar to many of you. Rachmanas is all from the same shoresh. Chizki. Chizki. Chizuk is strength. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. We say when we finish a book of the 5 books when we're doing the reading on Shabbat morning. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Stronger, stronger, or strength, strength. We will be strengthened together. So chizki, my strength. So you can see why Levi puts a comma after Adonai. And again, he doesn't use a word for God other than Adonai because he doesn't want to get involved in. He leaves the Hebrew word there. Okay? So, verse 3. Yud He Vav He Adonai. Now, these are all really interesting words. So, we have the word for strength and the word for compassion in verse number 2. In verse number 3, we have, I'm having a hard time reading on the screen, so I'm going to just read from my text here. Maybe my reading glasses need to be strengthened. Yud He Vav He Sal-I. So Samech lion. Samech Lamed Ayin. What is Samech Lion Ayin? It's some kind of word for rock, or they use here Craig, or where have we seen this word elsewhere in the Psalms? Does anybody recognize it? Where have we come across this word? Used a slightly different way. Let me see which psalm we saw it a lot. We saw it in a few different psalms, but one in particular.
Selah.
Selah. Same shoresh, right? And so remember where we said we don't really know what Selah means. Maybe it's a musical thing, but it means some kind of strong something, a rock. Here they use the word Craig, I think. Yep. Okay, so another word for strength. One of the big questions is why and how do natural terms get used in the Psalms? What do they indicate? We see mountains, we see rocks, we see valleys, we see, okay? So, Sali, my rock, my Craig, whatever, Sudati. So there, the Vav, is the Vav, and my Craig, and my Mitsuda is a, sound familiar? Mitsuda.
Volume of song for you.
What exactly? So Mitsuda is some kind of fortress, like Miflati. So all of these, and this is my rescuer, or this person who saves me, or the one who saves me. So lots of words of strength and protection, and being saved and being strengthened. Elit Sudi Echezebo. I take refuge, Bo, in him. Magini, another word of strength and protection, like the word Magain David. Magain is a shield. So my shield, so many words here of being protected. Vikeren Yishi. A Keren is a horn. Keren is also the word that got used in the Bible, where a horn of light came out of Moses's head. And I think it was the King James Bible, but I'm not sure. One of the Christian translations talked about it being a horn rather than light. And here's that word, Keren, a horn of my victory, Ishi, a horn of my Ishi, like Yeshua, which we've encountered many times in the Psalms, salvation, Miskabi, my sense of my stronghold. So in these couple of verses, over and over again, there's a sense of protection and of being strengthened and of being protected in different kinds of ways. 4, Mehulal Ekra Yudhe Vavhe. Now this is the same word, Mehulal. We should recognize that from a word like hallelujah, right? Mehulal, so praise or exalt, words like that. Praised, ekra, I will call out. Again, that's imperfect or future tense. I will call out, or you see how he's translating it, I call out. Because it can be either imperfect, can be either present tense or future tense. What it means is that the action is not over. So it can be ongoing. So ekra, if you said ekra in modern Hebrew, it really, I will call out, but I am calling out, this is imperfect. Ekra, yudhe vavhe. Min umin oivai, and from my, again, the word for enemies, one of the classic words for enemies, again, is this internal enemies or is this external enemies? I believe every psalm can be read either or both. And from my enemies, ivashea, the same word that we have up there is yishi. I will be, here that Levi says, made victorious. I will be saved. And again, this is the word that gets used for Christians. Understanding the Bible is often translated everywhere as salvation and meaning being saved by Jesus and by belief in Jesus. But Yehoshua, Ivashea, Yishi, it's used in many, many different ways, in many different times. Okay, 5. The cords of death are choking me. Chevle mavet. Mavet is death. So the psalmist shifts here what the feeling is, the cords of death. Everything before 4 is very much describing a sense of strength and a sense of being protected. 5, the cords of death. Now here, the word being used is Sheol. Chavel Mavet, I skipped the line between that. Destructive floods have swamped me. So again, the first few Psalms, first few Psukim verses, lots of expressions of strength, of all different kinds of strength. Imagine if you were to sit down and write from all the different things that make you feel strong. That's what those first few verses are. And then we have some verses of where we feel weak. Now, of course, it's David in this story, and they're very big and dramatic. But I think one of the challenges of this psalm, and we'll see some of the explorations of them, are how do we describe the things that give us strength and appealing to the universe or to God for more of that? And how do we describe the things that make us feel like the cords of death are choking me? Destructive floods have swamped me. The cords of Sheol have encircled me. The traps of death have advanced upon me. I mean, this is the ultimate description in many ways of the opposite of the first few psukim, of saying, here are all the ways that I feel completely out of control, completely on the verge of destruction, completely swamped in despair. And you'll notice Sheol, which is, we've talked about, he's not even trying to translate Sheol, and we don't really understand what the biblical author meant. It's something about after death. Some people call it hell. In many Christian translations, they absolutely call it hell. But you will notice the similarity to the word Shaul. So up above, he has the enemy in the person of Saul, of Shaul. And here are the cords of Sheol, and the Hebrew sivavuni, surrounding me. Sivavu, this is the same shoresh as sivivon, so, for a dreidel, because it means to turn around, but this is to surround me. Kidmuni, advancing on me, mokshe mavet, the word for death used again. Mavet, get used again. Again, there's a rhythm to these verses. Bitsarli, tsar is narrow places. The word Mitzrayim, that we're about to observe Pesach and leaving the narrow places of Mitzrayim, or also the Hebrew, the Yiddish word, many of us know in the Yiddish word Sores, for troubles. Here is Bitzarli, in my narrow place. Ekra, again the repetition of this phrase. Ekra, I call out. V'el Elohai av ashav, I can't read the verb. Ashaveya, again the same root for salvation or to be saved. I call out to Yud He Vav He. Yishma, listen, hear me. I feel unheard. I feel invisible. I feel alone. From my mehechalo kolo, from my voice, hear my voice from the palace. Again, the same word, we hear it again. Vishavati lifanav. Listen, may my calling out lifanav, again the word for before his face, tavo beoznav. May my appeals, my entreaties, my calling out enter into being heard, into the Holy One's ears. May they be received. May my desperate calls for someone hearing me, seeing me, may my invisibility end. 8. Pasuk 8. Again, I'm going to read it from down here because I don't know why I can't see so well. V'tigash v'tirash haaretz. Wow. And these are those dramatic, cinematic images, right? Tigash, the rumbled or the movement. So these are two words of movement here. Ra'ash. This is really so dramatic. The earth is moving and shaking and making noise. Umosdei harim yigazu. Mossad or a Mosdei, these are the foundations or the base of harim, our mountains. Yirgazu ha'amim, that's the great line that's used in Chichester Psalms that we read in Psalm 2. Yirgazu ha'amim are shaking here, the bases of mountains. In other words, the things we assume which are immovable, the very things we assume are too big to be affected by passing anything, those basic things in our world are shaking. The things that we accept as foundational are not. We're feeling the very earth underneath us shake. The things that we assume that democracy would survive, that elections could be free, blah, blah, blah. The very foundations are shaking. And again, the repetition of this word for tigash, ki haralo. God is furious. Remember, if we think of the word God as meaning all those things that are holy in the universe, the things that are right and good and just, are furious, are upset, the whole world is shaking. Allah Ashan, smoke has gone up in the nostrils of the Holy One. From God's mouth, from the very earth's internal place. Tochal, a consuming fire, a fire that consumes everything. Inside the holy presence, flames leapt from the coals. Wow. I mean, this is so dramatic. All right, 10. I'm just going to get through 10 and then I'm going to stop for today. V'yet shamayim v'yered. God stretched out. This is the word to stretch out, Samayans, and then descended. Yerida, yered. Again, this is the vav haipuch. Descended. And arafel is darkness underneath their feet. Vayeda. So let me stop with 10. Let me just stop with 10 so we get through the first 10 verses. Okay. Comments, questions, reactions?
let's
I
see
haven't been
again.
watching anything in the chat, so if there's.
Or Ezrahi.
I was intrigued in verse 3 by the different levels and kinds of protections, because certainly we experience different levels and kinds of
Yes.
fear and trepidation and all of that. And it's interesting to see kind of like a widespread gamut of protections.
Exactly. It's one of the things I love about this psalm. It is, first of all, it's so evocative, right? It's so evocative. But then that's why I asked the question, wow, if you were to list all the different things in your life that give you a sense of protection, what would they be? If you were to list all the ways you feel strengthened, and it's so interesting that that's where it starts out. Thank you for that.
Saul.
So the way the psalm is structured up to here, the first part up until line 4 is all about how God has helped the psalmist in the past. I love you and you've been my strength. And then starting in 5 is the horrible things that are happening right now.
Yeah.
And I noted when we looked at this yesterday that the Fisher leaves out 5, 6, and 7.
Interesting.
All that horribleness is not in the Fisher translation for whatever
Well,
reason.
Fisher does say the ropes of death bound me, floods of devastation terrified me, ropes of darkness cut into me, snares of death entrapped me. In Fisher, you didn't see that in Fisher?
I will go back and
Yeah,
look.
go back. So Fisher, those are his lines, which I think are how he sums this up. So maybe you're Fisher's long, so you might not remember that from the very beginning.
Kazan Hirsch.
Hi, so I wanted to go back to Selah because one is Selah with an ayin, that's the rock, and
Yeah.
Selah with the hay is the punctuation in the psalm. And so I didn't want us to go ahead thinking that they were the same. So,
well, yeah, the one thing is that the hay is a weak letter, so some people say that they're related because of that.
okay, interesting. My research is that the Selah is the rock and with the ayin, and that
Yes.
with the hay it is compared to an Arabic cognate, which might mean truth or valid or honest, or some people think it's related to the Hebrew word salah, which means to hang, and therefore has an idea of weight. So the validity is its weight. But I had never ever heard of those two words being equated, being possibly from the same root.
Yeah, and again, it's not that they're equated, it's just that because the hay is a weak letter, it can be, there's some speculation that the concept of a rock as being a heavy, like what you said about it being a weight, that it has some indication of a stop or something. We don't really know what it means. That's why the Selah that's used with the hay in Psalm 3 is not, Levi doesn't even translate it.
Okay,
I like to think of the connection, but maybe it's just I enjoy that sense of the roots of so much of this being in the landscape of the desert. But
got it. Lamadati, I learned.
Exactly. Excellent. Thank you.
Shep Wanon.
Yes, I believe the word Salah as a rock is in Israel's Declaration of Independence. There was a dispute between the secular and religious. The secular didn't want the name of God, and the religious did.
I think
So
they
they
use
settled on the term.
Suri. I think they use Suri, not Sela.
Really? I thought it was upon the rock. It was Salah? No? I think it
Well,
was
Suri means my rock too.
Oh, yeah, true.
But we could look it up.
Look it up. Thanks, Rabbi. This was a great
And the
class. I
Avinu
loved it.
Shabashamayim, Sur Yisrael.
Oh, Sur, right.
So it's Sur Yisrael, which is another word for rock. But you're absolutely right. The original prayer for the state of Israel didn't have Avinu Shabashamayim, which means our Father in heaven. It just had Sur Yisrael, meaning the rock of Israel. I don't remember what's in the Declaration of Independence, but for sure, for the prayer for the state of Israel, did not originally have God.
Thank you, Rabbi. This is a
You're
great class. I
absolutely,
loved it.
but the idea of what you're saying, Shep, is absolutely right. No God was in the original.
Dean Dresser.
Well, you know, I just love this, but I was seeing what I wanted, Rabbi, in like verses 7 through like 10, you know, at 7, he's calling out to God and he hopes for his voice to be heard in God's ear, but the response is my entry into God's ear, but the response is the smoke goes up, you know, God's nose, and then the fury comes.
I know, isn't it amazing?
And then the fire, the holy presence leapt from the coals. Going back to Psalm 11, where they bring up fire and brimstone, I'm just saying it's amazing to me that David, whoever penned this, can imagine from deep in the earth the emergence through volcanoes of overpowering, that they would claim to have that relationship. I mean, it's just, I don't know if the God's name in the Hebrew there addresses a shift, but I was curious about that.
Yeah, and for me, who always reads these naturalistic things as for me, it's such an obvious ecological statement, right?
Right.
If we mistreat the holiness and sacredness of the earth, guess what? That earth is going to explode on us.
Right.
You know, to me, it seems like such that's how I if we don't understand that the earth itself is sacred, wow, the mountains are going to rock. The earth is going to, and that's where, you know, so I that's how I feel it. Yep. And it's interesting because in the Hebrew, there is no word for God there, right? In the Hebrew.
Yeah.
Am I right about that? I'm going to look up because he that's the one thing about Levi is that he takes out Yud Hey Vav Hey because he doesn't want it to be there. So he does, but let me see in the Metsuda what it. Yep, it's just a reference. It's the pronoun is there, not the name for God.
Wow.
And so if you look at Metsuda, for instance, it just says smoke arose from his nostrils. It doesn't use the word God at all. Because there is no word God there. Levi is making it clear, and also Levi doesn't want to use him, I guess, there, but he uses him above. So I don't know, but that's a very good point.
Sarah Siegel.
Hi, thanks. Did I miss this, or did we talk about the coincidence or the relation of Tsuri, my rock, to Sorot, my sorrows?
No, we didn't talk about that because we just talked about the tsar from for narrow places and like Mitzrayim.
I just think that's interesting.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and one other thing too, I thought, okay, here's my hook for this psalm. It already came up today. Unfortunately, and my mom had it too, I just got a stenosis diagnosis, and my narrow place is my spinal cord now. So like, I really can actually write about that, perhaps. We'll see. Thanks.
Wow, that's so powerful.
Rabbi, there's some talk in chat about verse 5, the ropes of death, Chevle Mavet, which made me think of Sal Mavet, the valley, the shadow of death, and compound forms with Mavet or death in the Psalms.
Well, there's Mokshe also in the last, which is You see Mokshe Mavet also
Right.
in 6. Yeah, I don't have anything intelligent to say about that, except that it gets used a lot, that their descriptions of death and of Mavet are frequent. But I'd have to look some more to compare them. I don't know if anybody else has something to say for that.
The question, what does Mavet mean?
Mavet means death. Mot, Mavet, and a corpse, all of those are from the same word.
And Margot Kate says, was the scapegoat led on a rope? The scapegoat was led on a rope and then thrown over into the chasm with the rope still on. And would that have been the rope of death for the scapegoat?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. Wow. I don't know.
Barbara Grindell.
Okay, let's look at verse 2.
Let's look.
And yes, when I read those words, he said, I have loved you from the womb, Adonai. When I wrote the psalm for my son, I was talking to him, and those are my words. I loved you since you were conceived, and the whole 9 months I carried you. I just was so blown away by this ancient psalm and these words. And boy, I couldn't. I have loved you. Those are the same words I wrote, and I had no knowledge of this psalm or any other psalm when I wrote it. So really amazing, really amazing how it speaks. Yes. That's one reason.
Yes. Go ahead. Sorry, Barbara.
I was just going to say that's just one reason that keeps coming up, how the Psalms keep coming back to me in different ways. I'm just so happy to be learning. That's all I have to say.
And this is, I'm not sure I've seen another, I think Levy's is, I'm not sure, maybe the others who have studied this also, I'm not sure I've seen another translation use this, because I think it's very, very, very thoughtful and creative to use this rechem to mean both love and to acknowledge the rechem of the wound and rachamim and compassion of love. So that's very beautiful, Barbara. Yeah, I have, yeah. Cantor Nimi, let's hear, do you have thoughts about any of this?
So I was curious about the word chevle, chevle mavet, and thinking about, chavel or chaval, and wondering if, and I have to do a little bit of homework to see, it could be one of those where it's a root that has two different etymologies, but like to think about being surrounded by the futility of death.
There is a box outside that goes down for recycling.
Folks, you gotta mute people. We can hear you when you're on your phone or talking to your dogs or whatever.
I'll be close to them.
So yeah, I was really struck by, even if it's not the exact correct meaning, to be thinking about being surrounded by the futility of death.
That is so interesting. I've never thought about that.
Can I add something about this word?
Yael Bar Chava had something about that word too.
Okay.
So we say chevlei leida, which is the ropes of birth. It's another word to talk about the contractions that a woman has as she's going into labor. So the chevlei mavet and chevlei leida, they could be kind of parallel.
That's so interesting. I'm just looking at how altered. Yeah, he just says the cords of death and the cords of Sheol. He doesn't really comment on that.
Yeah, okay. Excuse me 1 moment. It's because on her Yael. We also have the Israeli song by Nomi Shemer that says Chevlei Mashiach Hine Zeba.
That's right.
How does that?
Something about the process of Mashiach coming, or birth coming, or death coming.
Yeah. Interesting.
All right, we have time for
certainly the word cords for me. The way that I'm reading the English, there's such a sense of increased strangulation of them. Like there's just a increased, not just the death is choking me, but this sense of it. It's not a snap thing. Okay, yeah. Let's see if we can get some other comments in there.
Phyllis Snyder.
Okay, so in lines 8 through 10. So what I thought of immediately for 8 was earthquake, for 9 volcano, and for 10 thunderstorm.
Yep.
Is that a thing, or is that not what it's talking about?
It absolutely could be what it's talking about, the sense of nature itself being loud and thunderous, and I think you're absolutely onto something, absolutely.
Because I know, like in ancient times, they didn't know anything about science. So it's like, oh, God's mad. There's an earth, like that's how they
Absolutely.
interpreted things.
Absolutely, and then, yeah, absolutely.
So Rabbi, we're at 10:42. Instead of going over today, which
Okay.
has been our habit lately, I thought we might take a breath and listen to a little bit more of the Steve Reich Tehillim.
Okay, and what I'd like to suggest to people, we're gonna try and do 10 to 15 verses a day. So if you want to look for the next 10 or 15 verses for tomorrow's class and look at different translations, that would be great. Look at different things and you don't have to. You could just show up without having done anything, but we'll be continuing like this as we move through, and you're gonna see a lot of different shades of things as we move through the psalm.
And I have a question for email responses. I am, as you know, the co-chair of, you may not know, Imagining Our Future, return to, what would it look like when, as things return to the new normal. And I know that a lot of people in this class have been taking the Hebrew class, Aleph and Bet. And I would just love to have a little bit of input as to how that class has changed your experience of this class, because I think the two go hand in hand. Um, and uh, and anything else you would like to tell us about the online learning that CBST has offered during this part of the shutdown? Not today, not in chat, but just email me. We're very interested in that feedback. And thank you very much. And let's listen to some beautiful Steve Reich on the way out. So there we are. Thank you all. See you tomorrow.
Give me the spray bottle. That was a brilliant choice, Ira.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you all.
Have a good day.
Well, I'm gonna say something. Mm. Mm. Mm.